I put together this presentation. This is not an in-depth historical overview. This is not a sermon. It's more so my way of trying to connect the dots of how we as African American people have arrived at this state where we're not getting the services that we need for our mental health. And we all know that there's layers to that. So, before I begin, one, because I'm a little nervous, but two, because I feel like I'm going to show some images that may be a little triggering for some of us. So I would like for us to take a deep breath. And, well, not yet. But as we inhale and exhale, I want us to think about what all we're coming with today. What are the layers that we showed up with today to this event? How did we get to this place where we are so strong together and we want to be active, we want to know about mental health, and we want to get the services that we need, but how do we get through the layers of what was done to us and how it happened to us? So I want to inhale with this idea that we're going to release this stuff today, and we're going to move forward from this day with an understanding that we are we design our own destiny. We create our own destiny. We can heal ourselves with using each other, education, awareness, and being of support of each other and attending events like this that Gigi has put on. So, on the count of three, I just ask you to inhale and exhale, and I'll begin. 1, 2, 3. Inhale and exhale. All right, and thank you, because I needed that, I think, more than y'all did. All right, so we're going to have a little fun, okay? It's going to be information, but we're going to get the information and then we're going to let it go. So, I want to talk about, next slide please. I want to talk about these definitions of mental health and wellness because they're very, very similar. So, mental health, a person's condition with regard to their psychological and emotional well-being, right? So the psyche and the emotions, the mind and the heart are all together in one accord. Wellness, which is a very similar definition, is the state or condition of being in good physical and mental health. So when I look at these two definitions, what is a commonality you see between the two? What's the common thread between these two definitions? I can't hear you. A person's condition. Right, a person's condition. But what I see is the psyche, right? One talks about the psychological well-being, and one talks about being in good mental health. So the psyche is a huge part of who we are in maintaining our wellness. Do we all agree to that? Okay. Okay. So, in thinking of that, the way that we came here as African American people was a very unique and uncomfortable way, right? How did we all get here to this country as African American people? Slavery. And that heavily impacted our psychological well-being. So with that, what conditions constitute wellness? Just call them out. We have sustainable housing, spiritual connections, healthy relationships with family or significant others, healthy diet or access to nutrition, good music that heals you, that's positive, awareness of familial and cultural history, so knowledge of self, reliable transportation, whether that means access to a good bus line or a car or a bike, whatever you choose, healthcare, getting your medical needs met, education, being able to advance, financial stability, having a good job, being able to pay for all the things that you need. Pets for some people, some of us, have dogs, cats, fish, what have you. And then physical fitness. So these are general ideas of what can, or what really supports a person maintaining their wellness. So what are the barriers to maintaining wellness? Well, there's a lot of them. You have neighborhood conditions. If you don't feel safe, ideally you're not going to feel good. You're not going to feel good in your body. If you don't have good nutritional choices, you're not healthy. There are judicial system disparities, or social justice system disparities. It's lack of cultural language if you don't really know. For me personally, these may not be true for all people, but for me personally, I want to know my language. I want to know how to walk into a room with people and be able to speak to them in a language that's not English, because my people didn't speak English. We had a different dialect, so these may be true for some people or may not. Personal discomfort, if you're not comfortable where you live and if you're not comfortable in the context of the system that we live in America, it doesn't produce wellness. Prejudice from society. So being an African American people, there are all of these labels and all of these stereotypes that they put on you. And in the media, they put it on you. Lack of awareness of educational resources. So it's not that they're not there, it's just that we don't know about it. We don't have the supports. We don't have the counselors who are really urging us and encouraging us to go after our dreams educationally. A lack of cultural practices. The libation that was done today, I've been in multiple groups with young people who know nothing about what a libation is, but they know how to pour out something for the dead homies, right? That's a libation. That is a cultural practice that we don't know. Economics, not having that financial stability, not knowing how to rebuild your credit or how to maintain or get good credit before you even get to 21. You know, some of us had those family members who have put our names on bills, and we looked up one day and was like, wait, I don't have good credit, but I never knew I had any kind of credit, you know? And of course the stigma of don't tell anybody what has happened to you and all of these things that we deal with in the context of society. And then the lack of cultural identity. This idea that I don't know how to be because I'm American and I'm African, and even though when I go out of America, they see me as American, but here, in America, they don't see me as American. So these are all things, and there are plenty of other things that are barriers to maintaining wellness for us. So, moving forward from that, next slide please. There were a couple of mental health diagnoses that were given to us during and after slavery. One of the first ones was from this gentleman, Ben Rush, who was actually one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, so a very esteemed gentleman. And he was considered the father of psychiatry. He diagnosed African Americans with this diagnosis called negritude. So the idea was that it was a mild form of leprosy, it was a skin thing, and the only cure for it was to become white. I can't make this stuff up. Okay, so this is more known anyway. It came from this fellow called Dr. Sam Cartwright, and he diagnosed African American or enslaved African Americans with something called drapetomania. Does anybody know what that was? Go ahead and say it. Running away, right. So drapetomania was this desire to flee captivity. It was a mental health diagnosis, it was a mental health illness to want freedom. Does anybody know what the cure was? Cut off your toes. It was a stage of cure. So first they would cut off your big toe. Then they would cut off both big toes. Then they would cut off your toes, all of them. Then they would cut off the foot or another limb, so that if you did try to run away, one, you couldn't if you didn't have a foot, but if you were missing an arm or a hand, they would be able to identify you and say, oh, that's such and such a slave. So after slavery, there were multiple things. This is just a brief overview. I'm not going to talk about every single little thing. But after slavery, what was something that happened to us that was widely known? The Tuskegee experiment. Right, and what happened again?
They purposely gave people syphilis and didn't treat them just to see what would happen. You know, people.
Right, and after they died, right, because they had to suffer through the disease, after they died, they did experiments on their autopsies.
Yes.
And the only form of incentive they got was, you know, free medical services. So they told these, so for 40 years, what was supposed to be a 6-month experiment lasted for 14 years. And they told these men that they were getting treated for bad blood, but what they were doing was experimenting on them and further giving them the sickness just to study on their autopsies. So that was the first thing that happened that we all know about. That was a huge act of mistrust and abuse from the American medical system. What was the second one that we all know about? HIV and AIDS. So there was a story about a scientist and a monkey and a virus that mutated and some other things and this and that and some other stories, some other cover-up that resulted in. Okay, it's all right. So HIV and AIDS, basically we were infected with this disease in Africa and here in America, and even today, we are the largest population who has the disease. And it spreads and spreads because we have this huge mistrust of the American medical system. We don't know whether to believe, we don't know what to believe from that. First it was slavery, right? First it was the kidnapping of our people from our land, brought to this country. We stopped in the West Indies. They told you how to be a slave. They broke you down mentally, brought you here to this country for hundreds of years, you know, brutalized you, maybe just dehumanized you, told you weren't even a human. After all of that, set you free, no support, no therapy.
Right. No
There was nothing to give us after that. We had to figure out everything on our own. Right. And then they hit us with syphilis, HIV. I mean, there were multiple other things. Right. We're not talking about Henrietta Lacks. You know, I mean, there were multiple things that were done to us in this country that affect our psyche and thus affects our ability to maintain wellness. So the slides aren't working, so I had a lot more slides to go over. Just pictures of how we're layered with all of these things. It's a layer that we have to remove. And how do we remove those layers? Because every day that we wake up, we're showing up with these things. We carry it with us in our jobs. We carry it with us in our dreams, with our families, with our kids, with our spouses, with our friends. These are things that we carry around us all the time. But we don't have to, right? So how do we heal this? We know. We have to educate ourselves. We have to know what was done to us and how it was done to us. And then we have to seek the proper treatment, right? So in one of the slides it talks about how there is 4% social workers who are African American, 2% psychiatrists, and 2% psychologists. That's a very low number of African American people in this field, and we need this field to be largely represented by African American people because they don't give it to us culturally appropriate. When we go and get services, or at least when I've gone and get services, I mean, I've showed up in rooms of people who felt like they knew my whole life based on just looking at me. And there were multiple providers who had done that to me. And it made me very angry and upset and bitter to where I didn't want anybody who was an African American psychiatrist or psychologist. But where were they? You know, so we have to get into the field. We have to heal first by educating ourselves, by talking to our family members, by reading books, by talking to our children about our familial and cultural history. You know, by knowing where we come from before slavery. We had a whole history way before slavery, and a lot of it is heavily influences American culture. On our dollar bills, it's African symbols. You know, even the way that we do our government, our medical system, all of these things come from Africa. So our influence is here, large and wide, but we don't see it because a lot of us don't know it. And the intention is so strong for us not to know it that we have to fight really hard to make sure that we're turning off the TV sometimes and reading to our kids and finding positive images and finding community events that are uplifting and empowering our people and doing positive work and providing healthy food for the community. So, you know, telling our kids about the Moors who civilized Europe. They conquered Spain and civilized Europe and brought them out of the Dark Ages. And they have an event that they call the Running of the Bull that symbolizes them running out the Moors. And it's like, well, we helped y'all. You know, can we get a celebration instead of, you know? But anyway, these are all of these things that we should be teaching our children, that we should be sharing with each other, that we should be finding and seeking venues that really support us culturally and holistically as a people. So, my slides aren't working, but I'm gonna basically just close with stay connected with the African American Empowerment Committee, stay connected with the POCC, get connected with peers, get connected with Dr. Wade and the Black Psychologist Network. Learn about these programs and these people that are really out here doing the work, because it's not like it's not getting done, but we just need to know about it. And we need to keep the positive as opposed to always holding on to, we live in a country where we can't call it home. We all know that that's true and that's fact, but we can make it a home, because we have. We're all still standing here today. We've all gone through this long line of slavery and abuse and trauma, yet we're still here today. We have a bone of resiliency, but we also have a bone of activism and movement. And so it takes the knowledge, it takes getting the service, and it takes telling somebody else and getting involved. If you don't want to be a mental health provider, be a peer counselor, or show somebody where they could apply, or, each one teach one. Because it's all about the community and supporting each other. So with that, I'm going to close. Thank you, Gigi. Thank you all for listening.
I am also a Pool of Consumer Champions member. I joined the Pool of Consumer Champions, and I looked around and I saw who was there, what was being said, who I felt had representation. And more than that, I saw who I did not feel had representation, who did not have a voice and visibility. That being the LGBT population of mental health consumers. Together with a brilliant young woman we wrote a proposal to the county and we proposed that they implement a new committee. Until January of 2013, there were 12 committees. There are now 13. The Sexuality and Gender Alliance Committee was born in January of 2013. I'm going to do the speech today that Dr. Martin Luther King did, the I Have a Dream speech. The I Have a Dream speech is a public speech that was delivered by American civil rights activist Martin Luther King, Jr. on August 28, 1963, in which he calls for an end to racism in the United States. Delivered to over 250,000 civil rights supporters from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial during the March on Washington, the speech was a defining moment of the American civil rights movement. I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languishing in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. So we have come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we have come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise so that all men, yes, all men, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check. A check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we have come to cash this check. A check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of this moment. This sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hoped that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, no, no. We are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Amen. I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina. Go back to Georgia. Go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friends, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream today. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for free together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with a new meaning. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside, let freedom reign. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom reign from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. And when this happens, when we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of